War I. Take it out for a bite more of death.
Webster is next on BC TV.
Good morning. The last time teachers in British Columbia went on strike, it was on a Friday, and they had a long weekend over their strike. It was about pensions. Yesterday I had Allan Blakey, president of the B.C Teachers Federation, on the air with John Fryer of the BCGEU. The one clear fact I established was that the teachers are jealous of a higher inflation indexing rate than that the government servants have. But here's what Blakey said last night at the big rally in the Orpheum Theatre.
More than talk, we're going to act. We're going to get our indexing back. We're not only going to get our indexing back, but we're going to get the right in the future to bargain that so that we won't have to go through this every 10 years. And I would encourage everyone to become involved with the local action plan development that will be taking place at the local level, to become involved in going back to your staff rooms, to get the other staff members who are not here committed to taking action, to become involved in making sure that the kind of protests and the kind of actions that we are taking will be heard loud and clear, to take a lesson maybe from one local when you go back, one local, I won't mention any names, they may be embarrassed, but one local has already gone out and has already adopted the withdrawal of extracurricular activities for January. And this was by a circularized ballot, the withdrawal of, or work to rule in February, study sessions sprinkled in, and 1 to 5 days strike or something along that nature in March.
I don't know why he didn't name the local that he was shy about that's going to take the three-step action in January, February, March. It's the Surrey Teachers Association. I learned that from a pamphlet put out by the Marxist-Leninist Organization of Canada in Struggle. Maybe that's what embarrassed Al Blakey on that particular subject. But in the studio this morning, I have the Cabinet Minister in charge of pensions, Evan Wolfe, the Provincial Secretary. Two short questions. Are you going to give the teachers full indexing?
Good morning, Jack. No, we cannot, as a committed policy, adopt full indexing, but a controlled fund for indexing is the government.
No full indexing?
No full indexing.
Are you going to give them the right to bargain their pensions in the future?
No, we cannot do that, Jack.
Okay, well, amplify that. There are two blunt no's to Blakey, pretty blunt nose to Blakey, and we'll get down to Evan Wolfe's view and hopefully some facts in the situation. Also this morning, I'm going to speak to the top official in the 264,000-member C.U.P.E, Canadian Union of Public Employees, Grace Hartman. And towards the end of the program, a sad and nostalgic and tragic story of the Canadians in Hong Kong in the late unlamented Second World War. But first for Evan Wolfe and the teachers' pensions after the break. Evan Wolfe is the Cabinet Minister in the Social Credit Government of Victoria in charge of pensions, teachers and public service pensions. Let me get a couple of basic facts first of all. Is it not a fact that you have backed down on an agreement you made in 1974 to give the teachers full indexing?
No, Jack, the previous government introduced full uncontrolled indexing in the year 1974.
Let me get that clear.
Yeah.
You're now saying it was the NDP that introduced the open-ended indexing in 1974.
That is correct.
That was a government commitment.
That's correct. And insufficient funding was provided to pay for full indexing on an unlimited basis, so that in 1979 and 78 discussions were entered into with the Teachers Federation to address this question, because by now we have an unfunded liability of some $550 million, and attributable alone to indexing, you have an unfunded liability or overdraft of some $100 million. So something had to be done.
Is that a total of $660 million
Yes,
down
that's
at
correct.
the end of 1979?
Well, something like that, correct. So what we've introduced in BC, partly on the recommendation of the BC Teachers Federation, was a package of improvements in the pension plan. One of them was to introduce a fund for the payment of indexing, so that there was a contribution going in from each side, and that there was an annual adjustment to be made only to the extent that this fund would pay for.
In other words, you put in whatever money was in the fund with the increased public and teacher contributions, you'd go that far in indexing.
That's correct.
And that would come to 8%.
That would come to 8%.
Did they agree to that?
That was a part of the package which they agreed to.
You virtually bargained with them for
In effect,
for an 8% cap.
Plus an agreement to increase the contributions to take care of the major unfunded liability. The government increased its contribution from 7% of payroll to 10.2% of payroll.
And the teachers, what do they pay?
They pay now 7.5%.
Are you telling me that the taxpayers of British Columbia put 10.2% of a teacher's wages into a pension fund?
Yes.
And the teachers put in 7.2%?
That's correct.
And this produced a formula which gave them what you believe to be an 8% indexing rate in the future.
Included in that was the amount that was set aside for indexing purposes on an annual basis. Jack, no other province in Canada has uncontrolled quarterly indexing of pensions, except for Quebec.
Quebec has.
Quebec, right. And I want to say that the government contribution, now increased to that 10%, amounts to $72 million in the year 1981. That's almost a 50% increase over the taxpayers' contribution on behalf of teachers for
Now,
1980.
Blakey didn't seem to be able to produce the figure yesterday when I asked him how much the pension fund was short. Give me that figure again.
$550 million
and $100 million more
for indexing.
to meet the index.
That's correct.
At 8%.
Yes.
And the 10.2% which we are now contributing to teachers' pensions will make up that $550 million deficit.
It's projected by the actuary. That's the figure required. This is why the teachers were part of that agreement, including the increased funding, including the new controlled approach, including increases to older pensioners of $50 a month, and it was a part of a package. So when the teachers changed their opinion on this at a very late date, they wanted to remove and reinstall full indexing at the very last minute and remove one part of the package. In effect, this was not acceptable, and the legislation was all ready to go. That's why the government proceeded at the time, after consulting with them.
Yeah, but
now, there's been an impression laid out that there's been no consultation.
No, perfectly clear. I had Blakey here yesterday, and
Yes.
I had a very smug John Fryer here yesterday of the BCGEU. And Blakey admitted that his people are jealous of the
Yes.
indexing you gave to the BCGEU
Yes.
after their strikes, after their walkouts. And they have indexing which is much closer. The figure we use is 12 to 15%. So having given the government services, given in to them after their strikes, obviously Blakey and his people are up in arms. They're going to strike. They're going to get the same indexing as the BCGEU.
Yes.
Is that not a good assessment?
Jack, I watched your show yesterday. I didn't attend because I think I was not invited.
No, you were not invited.
And therefore I'm happy to be here today, but
Blakey
I think we should correct one impression. There is a cap on the indexing in effect in both plans, both the public service and in the teacher's plan. The indexing provided in the government service plan is not 15%, it's not 12%, but approximately 10% of inflation. So if there's in excess of 10% of
Fryer
inflation...
yesterday said 12 to...
Well,
he went as high as
these
12%.
But if you refer to the teacher's indexing as 8%, then you have to refer to the government service indexing as 10%.
Why?
Because one has a contribution of 1.25% per month, and the other has a contribution of 1%. So one is 25% higher at the contribution level of the other. So
on indexing.
On indexing, right.
So if it's 8% for the teachers, it's 10% for the government.
That's correct.
If it comes out at 10% for the teachers, it'll be $12.50 for the
The
government.
point I want to make is that they're both under the new controlled indexing plan, as are the municipal superannuation retirees, as are the college pension people. I'm responsible for some 10 or 6 different groups in terms of pension plans. And my responsibility is not just to the teachers, but to all of the taxpayers of the province, who are footing this bill of some $72 million in the year 1981. I'm in favor of generous pensions for teachers. I have no quarrel to make with the teachers at all.
You know what the public thinks, don't you?
I'm
you
quite
know
aware
what
of
the
the
public
fact.
think who are not on index pensions, the private sector people. You brought a graph this morning, and I'm presuming it's accurate. Let me see the average annual pension. Yeah, teachers, how much? 6,119 average annual pension. Private sector, 2,800.
That's
now,
right.
Is that a proper figure, that 2,800?
That figure, Jack, is Stats Canada, a Statistics Canada figure
For
based
BC?
on 1977 in BC. In BC.
And the other one, I presume, is teachers too, for
Yes.
1977.
In other words, that is a government record Stats Canada figure, but the more up-to-date figure would indicate, I think, that the teacher's pension, average teacher's pension, is about $600 per month, and the average private sector pension is something under $300 per month.
What's the average government employee's pension in BC?
Approximately $400 per month.
Okay, 600 average for teachers, 400 average for government,
For public service,
and 300 for private sector.
something like that. And almost no private sector pension plan has uncontrolled or unlimited indexing. And very few have pension adjustments after retirement. Some have. But the information that I watched yesterday indicated that this was a commonplace in the private sector. You ask how many people out there are on pensions where there is an annual adjustment. I think we're still being responsible here in providing for an annual adjustment to the extent that the taxpayer can afford it, so that these people, now retired teachers who are concerned, know that they're going to get a very generous annual adjustment of pensions.
It's not the retired teachers people are worried about. It's the massive index pensions you're building up for privileged classes in the society who are able to get their money out the backs of the taxpayer.
Jack, this is a very important issue. All the government wants to do is to provide future security for people, young people who are now paying into pensions, so that they can be secure in knowing that when they retire, they're going to receive the pensions they've been promised.
More with Evan Wolfe, Provincial Secretary, after the break. Listen, just a broad question. Canada pension plan, all your pension plans. Do you think people will ever live long enough, even the brand new generation of employees today, to collect these fancy pensions? Do you think there's going to be enough money in the kitty for it?
That's a real concern. The Canada pension plan is really causing a lot of concern in terms of whether people are going to be able to find that they are going to receive those pensions, or whether the rules will be changed by the time they retire.
Fryer has the answer. He says everybody in the country should get the same index pension no matter what they do, and they should all have the same level of pension.
Well, I've talked to John Fryer on this question. He believes that regardless of what your status of employment is, everybody should retire on the same pension, regardless of how they've worked to improve themselves during their career.
Mind you, it's a bit annoying to see your highly paid civil servants who finish up with $35,000, $40,000 pension going to get, their pensions will double, and so will all reasonably indexed pensions will double in a matter of 4, 5, 6, or 7 years. The guy with a private sector pension, his pension halves in the same period of time.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jack,
am I being wrong? Am I being too bigoted, too prejudiced against what I regard as the government handouts by you people?
I think it's proper, though, that there is some adjustment factor, not on a sort of an ad hoc basis, so that retired employees right now have some protection against inflation. But we can't provide unlimited protection, and there should be some security involved in the situation.
The only people who get it are government employees, because you people just give in and put up the taxes.
No, but private sector companies, some of them who are responsible, make periodic adjustments in pensions on an ad hoc basis. Some provinces do this, but there's only one other province in Canada which has unlimited. Most other provinces, including Saskatchewan, have a cap on their indexing to some degree. And even Saskatchewan, I might say, which is the only province which has bargaining for pensions, you find as a result of that have in fact placed a similar cap on their indexing fund.
Well, we're very close to bargaining for pensions. When you said you were removing the full indexing, you did bargain with the teachers, and they bargained with you.
In effect, that's correct.
And you made a deal. And then when Fryer and the BC GEU stopped the ferry service, or at least the ferry union did, you bargained with them.
Right.
Were you afraid of the political strikes which were ruled not to be illegal by the Labour Board of British Columbia?
Well, as you know, the Labour Board is reviewing that decision. The decision did concern me, but after all, we're governed by their judgments on these things.
Was the Labour Board asked by the Social Credit Cabinet to review the decision?
Heavens, no.
I just
That
wondered.
was a decision that they made.
Now,
Jack,
go on.
Could we talk about investments just for a minute?
I was going to put it to you this way. One of Blakey's stronger points yesterday was that due to the way you invested, governments invested the money in the past at very low return, they have in fact with their pension funds subsidized industry and development in British Columbia. Now it seemed to be a reasonable point because I remember old WHC used to take the teachers' pension funds and stuff them away at 3 and 4%.
Well, Jack, years ago, due to the type of funding that took place back in the 40s, the teachers' pension fund in effect was broke, and pensions in those days had to be reduced. Let's not forget that. We just want that to happen again. As a result of which, you have at least partial funding of pension plans in British Columbia. Some provinces have no funding of pension plans.
You mean out of current revenue, like the federal government?
Setting aside money to pay for pensions in the future. The point here is that the suggestion that the investments have been poorly made is absolutely incorrect. Absolutely incorrect. The history of the pension plan investments for teachers is really very commendable. And you find that there are both old investments and new. Sure, some old investments were made at lower rates and still sit in the fund, but the new investments are being made at 10.5% and 11%. In the year 1979, the average return on the teachers' pension investments was almost 9%. And the return on any new investments placed in the year 1979 was 10.4%. Now, Jack, 10.4% is the market rate for long-term bonds, whether they're BC Hydro or who they are, at that period of time. So the Teachers' Pension Fund is getting the benefit of current market rates on guaranteed bonds, on AAA rated bonds in the province of British Columbia. They have the security of knowing that there's a future necessity to pay those, that nobody's going to back down on them. So it's incorrect to presume that the teachers' pension investments are a factor in this situation. They're being adequately made. And the point here is that we've now created an invitation for the teachers to participate in the investment committee of the government. The government employees have agreed to participate in this.
Oh, I didn't
and
know
the
that.
teachers have been invited to participate in the process of deciding where these investments are placed.
So John Fryer is going to put a representative on the
He's already
investment
nominated
committee?
one, yes.
And Blakey won't?
And Blakey has not decided to, the Teachers Federation have not decided to participate. Now, I find this is kind of a paradox when they are questioning the quality of investments and yet will not participate in the investment committee of the government. I'm hoping they'll reconsider that.
Because they've got their heels stuck in. They think you succumbed, which you probably did, to the strikes by the BC GEU, and they're now talking Surrey Teachers Association, whom he was too shy to name, are going to have a half-day withdrawal of services on November 19, extracurricular activities, whatever they are, I don't know, 9 January, a full-day withdrawal of services by a member of the STA in the rally in Victoria on the first day of the spring sitting. Doesn't say anything here about 1 to 5 day strikes, so, and that's what Blakey said. Maybe he knows more than I do. However, probably does.
There is a feeling.
Are you worried? Do you suspect you have the public on your side, or the public against you? Because after all, everybody respects, properly so,
I don't
the
like
teachers.
to see the misunderstanding amongst the responsible teachers who view this as an unfair activity of the government. All we're trying to do is secure these pensions for the future, both on behalf of those people who are on pension now and those young teachers who are paying substantially into it, and to the tune of 7.5% per month. And I want to emphasize this, that comparing the government employees' pension plan with the teachers' pension plan is completely different. The two plans have completely different
You
funding.
say average government pension $400 a month, that's the overall average.
Yes, yeah.
Average private $300, average teacher $600.
Yes, but there is effectively no unfunded liability in the government employee's pension plan. It's been paid for from time to time. So we're comparing two different things.
What's an unfunded liability in the government one?
The government it's none,
Zilch.
except due to indexing, which has now been addressed through the capping.
We have $550 million shot in the teachers.
That's correct.
How did that come about?
Very rapidly.
Sloppiness?
Very
Sloppiness?
rapidly. No, it came about, Jack, for two reasons. The improvements in benefits in about 3 or 4 cases over prior years, including the improvements that were made in the year 1972 due to the demonstrations that took place at that time, and secondly, due to the inflation in the payroll in the period of time involved.
You're blaming it all on the NDP for giving them full indexing.
I'm not
in
blaming it all on the
1974.
NDP. A lot of other places developed unlimited indexing, but we've come to the point in time that we have to change this.
Okay, time for one segment of phone calls if there's any interest in this subject, apart from teachers, government employees, and the long-suffering public after the break. Silly question, because I'm sure Allan Blakey's watching this morning, but it's really my fault, I suppose. I did not invite you to appear with Blakey. Had I done, would you have come?
Yes, I will.
All right, when he heats up again, will you come back with Blakey?
Certainly I will.
Good. Why didn't you go to the meeting last night?
Because, Jack, I declined because I don't think that's a proper forum to discuss a technical, complicated question like pensions.
It's no less improper than a simple-minded program like this.
The point is that I've debated with Mr. Blakey before on radio and in my office many times. But I think that that's the proper place in which to negotiate, discuss these matters, and find out what really is the solution to them.
Anyway, your position right now is you will not give in to full indexing, and you will not give them a contractual right to bargain pensions.
Well, that's simply not provided in the law.
Oh, that's not the question I asked you.
I know what you said, but...
And your answer is no and no.
That's correct.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Wolfe, there's a little confusion in my mind. When I hear you speak of pensions, I hear you speak of the BCGEU pension and the teacher's pension. What about the municipal government pensions? Are they being handled in the same manner?
Yes, they have the same limitation on indexing, the controlled fund for indexing, as applies in the other two cases.
Okay, what is happening to the additional amount that we've been asked to contribute that is supposedly going to cover this indexing? Are we going to see anything of that ourselves, or is this just something that we lose entirely to cover the present people who are already on pension?
No, the controlled fund is used annually to determine how much pension adjustment will be made in the following year. And it's only to that extent that it's used to adjust the pensions of those who are currently on pension.
Okay, well, the thing I'm getting at is, for example, if an individual retires or resigns work with the municipal government, will he see that extra percentage point, I believe? I think it's either a half or 1 full percentage point that we're contributing at this point in time. Will we see that money, or is that money lost?
You're referring to the municipal employees now?
That's correct.
Yeah. Of course, that's up to the municipalities. We administer their act, make the changes that are requested in their act as a rule, but they are in part involved in that process.
Too technical. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. Mr. Wolfe,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm extremely pleased that the government is now making different types of investment which are yielding higher returns. But is it in fact true that in the years from 1964 to 1978, that while the teacher's pension plan was having returns of approximately 7.8%, they could have achieved a higher rate through industrial bonds, which were 8.46%, provincial bonds, which were 8.22%?
Good question.
It's very easy to look back and say that I should have invested in this rather than that. The laws in the province provide that they're invested only in secure bonds, guaranteed government securities. I don't think there's, you can go back and show where investments were made at 7% 3 or 4 years ago. That's not pertinent to the situation today. So I think the case is not there in terms of them being poorly invested.
You can't invest in speculative gas and oil stocks or mining stocks for pension funds.
I don't think anybody would want us to speculate on pension investments.
Victoria, go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack. I'd like to respond particularly to a question which you asked about yourself and about your attitudes about index pensions. You asked, in effect, as to whether you were being too bigoted. I'm afraid the answer to that question is absolutely right. You are being absolutely too bigoted.
Could be, that's why I put it. I feel sorry for the guy. I'm not worried about Webster, but I feel sorry for the guy in the private sector whose taxis are raided all the time to make things even more comfortable for provincial government employees or school boards or teachers.
Jack, you made the point on the television a moment ago that the guy with the big pension would have it doubled, and the guy with the little pension would have it.
Right.
Well, obviously that's ridiculous. The small man's pension would be in effect cut in half by inflation if we didn't have indexing to protect him. Right?
That's correct. The private sector employee.
But the big guy's pension would not be doubled. It would simply be leveled with the cost of living.
Nonsense.
And you're the one that's talking nonsense, Jack. I think you're not being reasonable at all.
Mr. Wolfe?
You're
Let's try Evan Wolfe on it. I'm just a layman.
Well, the question here is whether Jack was bigoted or not, I think.
You're speaking from the position of a wealthy man who's afraid you'll lose a little bit for the poor little guy.
No.
Yes, you are.
Speaking for ordinary people.
You're being very unreasonable.
I think the point here, though, is that 99% of private sector pensions that exist do not have adjustments for pensions due to inflation.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, we'll just have to disagree on that. I've got to show my prejudices now and again. Go ahead, please, from Abbotsford.
I have three different things I would like to comment about. Somewhat relating to that previous gentleman, I feel that the public is being told that they are very responsible for a portion of teachers' pensions. I feel that when I go into the private sector and purchase an item, I am contributing to the pension fund for that company when I buy their product, if they have a company pension plan.
Well, we might have an egalitarian law one day that everybody must supply index pensions to every employee. That's what John Fryer thinks might happen, don't you? Do you think that'll happen?
That's what, that would be a very socialistic viewpoint that in fact, the viewpoint there is that regardless of your earning power during your career, everybody retires with the same amount of pension.
Yes, by the way, your provincial pension is just as generous, if not more generous, than this one, isn't it?
Well, it's
as a cabinet minister.
It's about your MLAs. That's a good question. Are a part of this controlled indexing.
Up to 8% or 10%?
To the same extent that the public service is.
So you're in the higher
They're
one.
treated in the same one.
It's not funded either, is it?
Well, they pay substantially more into it than your regular public service employee.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I just was, wondering if you could just explain further that years ago people were trying to get the money out to invest in their own private way because they could have made more at it. And secondly, the latest date that Mr. Wolfe went back to was 1979, which was too recent. How about 15 years ago when all the money was being putting into the provincial bonds and so on?
They still are.
Yeah, but
the point I'm making is that they're secure, they're invested and always have been at the current market bond rates of the day. So I think it's really not proper to assume that they've been invested at reduced rates. This is an incorrect impression.
Okay, one question for me and another piece of my personal bigotry. I notice the teachers have got some hundreds of millions of dollars involved in that somewhat bankrupt establishment, B.C. Rail. Do they get the interest on those investments?
They certainly do.
From general revenue?
I'd rather have them invest in that railway than in some others which are in, also in financial difficulties because they have the government guarantee, which is a AAA rating by the bond houses in New York.
In other words, even if they can't get it out of BC Rail, they'll get it out of general revenue.
Yeah. Jack, could I make one other point
One
here?
last point.
Okay, and that is that there has been consultation, and I invite the teachers to remember that my door is certainly open to continue discussions with them on this whole subject. I'm not, trying to fight with the teachers. I'm respecting the fact that we want generous pensions addressed to the one of our top careers in the province. It's in the interest, I think, of all British Columbians. But as a matter of fact, our provincial Minister of Education, Brian Smith, has been making a tour of the province, visiting a number of school districts, and he has a number more to be visiting. He's hearing about this subject. And I know we'll be coming back to Cabinet to discuss the matter, but my door is open, and I just want to suggest that although we're committed to a controlled fund, which has to be responsible in that it's secure for the future, that, I'm prepared to talk to them at any time on this question.
And give them more money?
No.
Grace Hartman of C.U.P.E.
You keep putting words in people's mouths.
I try to get yeses and nos.
I see.
Grace Hartman of C.U.P.E. next. My thanks to Evan Wolfe. I'm full of my bigotries and prejudices this morning, and I'm terrified, of course, of women's lib. And I tend to snicker at some of the steps forward taken by women in their advance in freedom. However, with what I hope was a sense of humor this morning, when I introduced Grace Hartman, president of C.U.P.E, Canadian Union of Public Employees, I threw up this little line. Grace Hartman, a C.U.P.E doll. I thought you'd come on and smack me in the teeth for sexism, Grace.
Well, you know, maybe I'm getting too old, but I recognize that this is no C.U.P.E doll, you know, and if you're trying to get involved in what we might call sexual harassment, I think you and I are just a bit long in the tooth for that.
Are you suggesting we're too old to be involved in sexual harassment?
Well,
listen. I talked to one of your people the other day. Very serious woman. I won't give her name. And she says that the three key things that you people are, three of the things you're fighting are. First of all, we'll take the serious one. You want, broadly speaking, the base rate for clerks and C.U.P.Es to equal the base rate for labourers.
Right. We want the base rate in the clerical contracts to be the same as the base rate in the outside. Yes.
How much of a difference would that make to your 264,000 members, those of whom are clerks?
How much difference would it make?
In money?
Well, it would vary in the provinces. BC is the only one at this moment that's going after that in any large way, and I suppose in some areas it would mean it could mean $3 an hour. In others, it would be less.
Because the base rate for a labourer in the Labourers' Union in British Columbia is somewhere in excess of $11.50 an hour.
No, we're not talking about the labourers in the Labourers' Union. We're talking about the labour rate in a C.U.P.E contract. And I don't think we have attained the $11.
In other words, the C.U.P.E contracts generally, because they're year-round jobs, are not as high as the seasonal jobs in the construction industry.
No, I would think, and I'm speaking off the top of my head, I would think they would be somewhere in the range of $8.
About $8. Mm-hmm. And your clerical rates would be somewhere in the range of what, $5?
Between 5 and 6. Yeah.
Have you people got it? Oh no, back to the other stuff. I am told that have you got in any of your contracts across the country a provision to protect women, presume it doesn't apply to men, from sexual harassment?
Now, I don't know if we have actually negotiated, but it's on the table in quite a number of places across the country, and we have a clause that we're hoping to negotiate, and that's on the table here. And I understand it has the solid support of the male members of the committee and the male members in the local unions.
Would you forgive me if I say it sounds a bit stupid? I mean, I've never worked in a plant or a factory, right? Okay. I've only worked in offices. And not once have I ever heard of a serious case of offense being taken of sexual harassment. I'm prepared to believe it happens by a woman. Now, how the devil would you, a man to a woman, how the devil would you put that in a contract? What good would it do?
Oh, well, wait a minute. It does do some good, and we have some human rights legislation also, but if it's negotiated into the collective agreement, that's a type of attack that usually by a man on a woman, or it can take a variety of forms. It can take the form of someone might be very incensed if you call them a C.U.P.E doll. I'm not sure that I'd get terribly upset about that remark, but I might if you called me some other things, or if you made it contingent on my offering you or giving you sexual favors before I got a promotion. And that happens. You know, you say you haven't come across it, you haven't worked in a factory, but there are lots of, or a shop, there are lots of women who have had to job opportunities erased because they weren't prepared to go that route.
I'd like to know how you'd handle it in a contract. In other words, if a woman was fired right now from a position in a plant, and the reason she felt she was fired because she had refused to give sexual favors to a boss or a fellow worker, would that not be fully and properly covered by the grievance procedure in contracts at this particular moment?
It might be, but it's one of those very difficult things. There's no question about it. It's going to be difficult to prove because if it's a supervisor, always the supervisor is going to have the ear of the employer to a much greater extent than the woman is.
Do you suggest that there's any particular area of work involved in government circles where this is more common than another? Offices, factories, I don't know.
Yes, it can be anywhere. But don't forget that these are times, whether you agree with them or not, when women are moving into less traditional jobs. And there is something about that brings out the worst in some men. And they feel threatened, maybe. And they tend, therefore, to make it much more difficult, either by their remarks or the use of their hands or whatever, to make it difficult for women.
I presume you're not going down to the level of kind of a little risky Copytron conversation at the Copytron copier.
No, I don't think that's what
Although that's the impression I get from some of your women, because one of them was telling me the other day that one thing that they want to see in contracts is that no woman should have to go and get coffee for the supervisor or get his shirt from the laundry. I mean, now that's coming to the point of being bloody ridiculous.
Why? Why should I, if I'm your secretary, go and pick up your shirts, or why should I feel that I had to go and get you a cup of coffee, and if I didn't, somehow or other, I could be disciplined?
Because I'm too busy to go and get a cup of coffee when I'm on the air doing this and that and the next thing. And I have a good relationship with my staff, and any one of them will get me a cup of coffee.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair, sure.
At least I think I have. Joanne, get me a cup of coffee. Please, please. But make sure it's hot. And if it's not hot, I'll throw it in your face.
You see, that's the kind of thing we...
I'm joking.
I know you are. I know you are. But I have no qualms.
Surely human beings can be left to have their own personal relationships without the damn union coming in and saying, you will not ask anyone to do a demeaning job such as getting you a cup of coffee.
Are you going to let me explain this? You're going to let me talk about it?
Sorry.
Okay. I have a secretary, and sometimes when she's going to get a cup of coffee, she'll say, Grace, would you like a cup of coffee? Sure. But sometimes if I'm going to get a cup of coffee, I have no problem in saying to her, can I get you one? But I don't require that she does that. I don't require that she goes shopping for me.
A cup of coffee, Jack, and it's not cold.
There you go.
You're fired. You were cheeky on the telly. I'm joking.
So, those are some of the things.
I'll drink it. Now, shirts from the laundry I can understand. Unless the relationship allows it. Do you mind picking up on your way, or would you go down and get my laundry? Now, what the hell's wrong with that?
That's something different. But, it's maybe not as much now because there's been a struggle against this. But that was something that secretaries felt they had to do. They had to go and buy the birthday gift or anniversary gift for their boss's wife and do the Christmas shopping and all that sort of thing. I don't think they should have to.
And it should be in the contract?
Sure, if that's the only way you can protect it, you put it in the contract.
I think you'll finish up all you people and the succeeding generations behind me making us a nation of neuters.
I doubt that. No, I doubt that.
Right now, what other things are we going to talk about after the break? Couple of points. I'm still staggered by the figure that you gave me for your membership. 264,000 members.
That's right.
So you cover what?
Well, I suppose we have the most diverse membership of any union, maybe in the world. We have everybody from daycare workers, social workers, librarians, municipal workers, school boards, hospitals, homes for the aged, hydros.
In other words, C.U.P.E is involved in all three or more levels of government.
Not really, mostly at the municipal level. We have a few provincial government employees, and we have a few provincial crown corporations like workmen's compensation. Very few federal government, the employees of the CBC.
You have the employees of the CBC, right. The On-air people?
Well, some of the announcers are members.
Are all members of C.U.P.E? Okay. Next thing, didn't the Auditor General look? No, it was the federal government. The Auditor General said that they were only getting 60% work out of civil servants.
That's right.
How do your people stack up in that?
Well, I don't know.
Because you know the public image of civil servants ain't all that good.
Right? Oh, okay. And a lot of people have combined to make it that way. But you know, if you're only getting 60% out of any employee, then I want to look at the supervisor and maybe fire the supervisor.
Okay, a civic employee union leader in Prince George, Fornari his name is, Reno Fornari, says that his members can expect suspensions and dismissals if they continue to abuse sick leave, and he has offered $50 to every union member with a perfect attendance record. The public is entitled to full value for its money, and the time has come to stop ripping off the taxpayers. Have you spoken to Fornari about that?
Yes, I talked to him last night for a few minutes.
Were you mad at him?
Not really. I have never felt, when I was a municipal employee and negotiating my own collective agreement, I used to say I wanted to negotiate improvements. I didn't want to have to fight to hang on to anything that was there. And I believe in giving a good day's work for a good day's wage. And I'll fight for the wages, and but I'll also fight people who may be accused wrongly of taking time.
What do you think of the Fornari plan, presumably out of union funds, to give $50 to every union member with a perfect attendance record?
Well, I don't think it's to everyone. I think they're going to have a draw. I think if you read that a little further, they're going to have a draw for all of those people with a perfect attendance, and that person is going to get $50. Well, you know, I don't think you should have to do that, however.
You don't think you... But don't you... do you not feel that there is considerable abuse in your quite generous allowance of sick leave, which doesn't always have to be certificated, as I recall, general civil service contracts?
It depends on the length of time the person's off. And I think we have a responsibility to see that our members are on the job unless they really are sick. And personally, I had a sick leave plan, and I felt that was for that purpose. And
but aren't you lucky enough if you don't use your sick days that you can pack them up and keep them for your retirement time and get an extra month or year off or something?
Sure, whatever you negotiate. But I'm more concerned about the fact that, you know, I could go out and get hit by a car or be involved in a car accident. I might be laid up for months, and I have that protection.
Okay. You're in Vancouver for a board meeting?
The British Columbia Division Board meeting, yes.
Right now. How do you tell me that your wage levels stand with the other unions like BCGEU and the inflation? How do you feel about the prospects for your member for wage increases, and what do you want, broadly speaking, to get across the country as your contracts come up for renewal?
Well, broadly across the country, let's start with BC, because that's where the greatest number of people are bargaining at this moment, with the exception of Ontario hospital workers. And you know, when you see in a province like this, it is certainly not a have-not province, and you see that our members have fallen way behind the forest industry, which they used to be equal to or slightly better. Then I think this is a result of the anti-inflation regulations, that period of holding back the public sector. And it costs us as much to live in British Columbia as it does the woodworkers. And I feel that our members have some catching up to do.
Are you not still entitled to be treated slightly differently because of the security your people have? And your not all indoor workers, of course, that's a wrong remark. But you're working for government, your wages are assured, it's always the taxpayer who picks up the tab, and you probably don't agree with me, the taxpayer is sick and tired of picking up 15-16% wage increases for public servants.
Well, you know, why should we be treated any differently? You say our jobs are secure. We're suffering cutbacks right across the country, especially in social services. And these are, you know, people today want the services we provide. I'm sick and tired of being told we're unproductive. Just because I don't produce a telephone or I don't produce a television set or a cup or something, that doesn't make my contribution to society any less. If I'm looking after the old and the sick or the children, or I'm teaching school, or I'm answering switchboards, or whatever I'm doing, if I'm providing a service to the public, And then I shouldn't be a second-class citizen, and my wages shouldn't be less than someone who's producing that television or car or whatever.
In your time in the union, in C.U.P.E, you've seen an incredible improvement in wages and working conditions, haven't you?
Yes, yes I have.
Almost beyond your wildest dreams.
Well, yes, but we still have a lot of low-paid hospital workers, homes, you know, daycare workers.
They're not low-paid in British Columbia, surely to goodness.
No, not as low-paid as...
In fact, the nurses are absolutely... The nurses got a fantastic increase because your low-paid hospital workers were getting as much as they were, right?
No, you forget we don't have the hospital workers in BC.
You don't have LPN people?
No, they're all in the
What are
Hospital
they?
Employees Union.
Oh, Hospital
Remember
HEU, the Hospital Employees Union, that's right. Okay, where's the toughest place in the country to negotiate?
Maritimes and Alberta.
Alberta. Why would it be tough to negotiate in Alberta? They're the wealthy province.
It may be, but Peter must be putting it all into his heritage fund because, you know, we had a strike of clerical workers there in the summer. And
I remember that.
We have a nursing home strike that's almost 4 years old. That's a privately owned nursing home, but however, we don't find that it's easy at all to negotiate in Alberta, the Have province. I can understand, and I'm sure you can understand, it would be more difficult in the Maritimes, but, and there's tremendous unemployment.
To my eternal shame, I haven't been in the Maritimes for probably 20 years. Are conditions that much noticeably different in wage levels and living standards?
Living standards, yes. Cost of living, no. Cost of living, I find, if I have an opportunity, I try and look around the shops. I don't always have the time. I don't even have time to do my own shopping, but... I
hope your secretary doesn't do it for you.
No, my husband does.
Oh, your husband does it.
But we find that wage levels, sometimes I wonder why people would want to work in nursing homes and hospitals and so forth in the Maritimes, because they could probably get as much on unemployment insurance, but
okay,
they don't want to do that.
I wonder if we should go to the phones and sexual harassment, or am I just trying to cause slippery trouble? I don't think we will. Grace, I'm very grateful you were here this morning. I've got a couple of things I've got to do yet, and I'm going to let you go. Don't overdo this sexual harassment contract business.
What are you so worried about?
Not worried about it. It just seems so stupid.
Well, maybe it does. You see, that's the problem with a lot of things that women have been fighting for. Men have never suffered those things. You've never been told in a job that you couldn't have that job when you know perfectly well you could do it, but you can't have it because you're a woman. I've had that happen to me. And
that's different.
Yeah,
I'll accept
that. Okay.
Mind you, you may destroy the whole family life of the country forever, and I'm only half joking. My thanks to Grace Hartman, the president of C.U.P.E. Who's been a real doll this morning. No, I'm only joking. Thanks for taking my twisted sense of humor. Next, I'm going to do Ted Ferguson and Hong Kong after the break. The desperate siege, the Battle of Hong Kong. I'm going to take you back in kind of miserable nostalgia to one of the worst things that ever happened to a Canadian fighting force. In 1941, after the British Crown colony of Hong Kong fell to the Japanese, Christmas Day 1941. Ted Ferguson, the author, is not a survivor of that era. He's a writer who researched it. And you know, it's a very difficult book to read. It's so gruesome in places. It's exciting. But perhaps you better give us the basic facts, because it becomes obvious, and I was never in that part of the world during the war, it becomes obvious that this was the biggest shambles possibly that the British, with their unpreparedness, got into.
Yes,
give me the background to the so-called siege of Hong Kong.
Well, what happened basically, Jack, is that they sent 2,000 Canadian troops over to help the British defend the colony that Winston Churchill had already written off as expendable. He said, there's a very little strategic value, we might as well just let it go if the war breaks out. And the troops were sent over from the Winnipeg Grenadiers and the Royal Rifles from Quebec. Were very ill prepared for it. They had very little ammunition, they didn't have motorized transport. The whole thing was bungled before they left Canada. Some of the people had only had 6 weeks of basic training. There was a hunchback among them, guys with respiratory illnesses. I don't know how they got in the Army, but they did. 16 and 17-year-old kids. A lot of them were misfits that joined the Canadian units.
A lot of them came from Vancouver, too. No, they sailed from Vancouver.
They sailed from Vancouver. Today, a lot of them are living in British Columbia, but they came from Vancouver, from across the prairies, from every part of the West.
2,000.
2,000 all
Ill-prepared.
Ill-prepared.
Untrained.
Untrained.
Recruits.
That's right.
From which regiments?
The Winnipeg Grenadiers and the Royal Rifles of Quebec. And there were 10,000 British troops all over there when they went over. It made a force of 12,000. And there had opposing them 60,000 Japanese soldiers.
Now, what did British... You said that Winston Churchill had already written off the defense of Hong Kong. Now, just to put my memory in gear, was this about the time of the sinking of the two battleships? Was it the Repulse and the Renown?
No, the Prince Edward... yes, that's Prince of Wales. That's about the same time. That happened a few days after the war broke out. He had written it off long before that, he thought, because it has very little value except for psychological value for a victory in that part by the Japanese, in that part of the world.
Was that the colony where they had the guns facing the wrong way?
Yes, they faced them towards the sea in the south because they thought the Japanese attack would come in from the sea. It did come in from the north when it did come eventually, and they were all looking the wrong way.
Now, you paint a very miserable story. Were there any successes by either the British or the Canadian troops when the 60,000 Japanese came in overland?
I don't know what you can consider successes. They fought tenaciously and courageously. There's some incredible incidents of courage during the battle where people, Canadian soldiers, one fellow, John Osborne from Winnipeg, threw himself on a grenade to save his comrades. At different points during the battle, the Canadians were throwing rocks, empty rifles, pieces of machinery at the enemy. Their courage is absolutely extraordinary, considering what they're up against.
Without any training, without any proper weapons.
Without any proper weapons, that's right. Some of the regiments I know only had enough ammunition for 5 minutes of rapid bombardment, enough mortar ammunition.
Was it not a fact, according to your book, that the social life was still going on in part of this complacent colony while the fighting was taking place around it?
Yes, it was. I find that quite extraordinary. Some people were still going out conducting business deals as if nothing was happening. I think they were just trying to block out what was happening, like it wasn't really going to happen. They really believed right up to the very last that the Japanese would never dare step on the British lion's tail. So they're very, very shocked when it all did happen. And I don't think some people really accept the fact that it was happening. They really thought there was going to be a counteroffensive and they'd push the Japanese right back across the border.
And after the 17th day, what happened?
Well, the most difficult part of the book to write was what happened around the 17th days. When the Japanese came in, there were a lot of mutilations, massacres.
See, the Japanese are now our friends and our allies.
Yes.
And here you've gone to the considerable research needed to point out that the Japanese, the forces of the emperor, shall we say, behaved in an unutterable fashion.
Some did, others didn't. Some were Christians and they were very kind towards the people they captured. Others believe in the Bushido Code, which, to put it down very briefly, is that if you're surrendered, you shouldn't surrender to the enemy. It's very unhonorable to do this, dishonorable to do this. You should commit harikari if you were captured. Therefore, the Canadians and the British troops who surrendered were considered to be so cowardly they're worse than dogs and they could do whatever they wanted to.
And what did they do to them?
What did they do to them? In some cases, they cut off their ears, they cut out their tongues, they bayoneted them. The nurses were gang raped repeatedly. They're hideous
how
things.
could they justify the gang raping of nurses in this particular? You might say, okay, the man's a coward, he surrendered without being severely wounded.
Yes.
But there was no justification, surely, whatsoever of some of the incredible family raping that took place.
Because some Japanese generals believed in rewarding their troops for victory by giving them 48 hours and could do whatever they wanted to the people in the places that they conquered. That was part of their reward for having conquered them.
You mean the 48 hours?
That's only some generals. Some didn't believe in this at all. Others did. But 48 hours, you just go in and they called them flower girls. That's what they called prostitutes. And they said, well, you can consider all women in this conquered area to be flower girls and do what you want with them.
Whether they were white or Chinese?
White or Chinese. And it happened in Nanking, the rape in Nanking. I think there were 20,000 women were raped at that one point, just before they went to Hong Kong.
So can we excuse this of the Japanese by saying that this was part of their culture?
I certainly wouldn't excuse it, but then I view it from a
Can you understand it?
In a sense, I can understand it. I'm glad I wasn't there, but in a sense, I can understand it because they view things differently than we do.
They certainly did.
They certainly did, yes.
I presume that 30 years of democracy have perhaps changed that, although hopefully we're not going to be involved in any more
armed conflicts, yes.
Armed conflicts of any kind. Now, 10 years ago, I remember you worked for the Vancouver Sun of all people.
That's right.
And what were you doing then?
I was a television critic there for a couple of years.
What made you do this?
Well, I've been freelancing as a journalist for about 10 years now, and this is my third book, and I like digging up facts of things that haven't been written about before in full extent. This thing, a lot of people remember that something terrible happened in Hong Kong in 1942, but they don't really know the...
41 and 42.
41. But they don't remember the full extent of the horror, what actually happened. I didn't know myself until I started researching it.
It just goes to show you that it was really accidental. Well, I was going to say that we won the war at all, but that in the early part of the war, 1941, these unfortunate Canadians enlisted in the army, and you say the medical examinations were so bad that...
In some cases, that some people snuck through. There were people with problems that did get into the army. I think they really needed them. One grenadier officer said at the time that the reinforcements they took at the very last to send to Hong Kong, they took 600 people to join to the other battalions, were the sweepings of the depots, that's what he called them. People from other parts of the country, they just put them all together and let them join up and go over. They didn't really think they were going to see active duty. They believed it was a garrison guard duty thing.
Did the British pressure, who was Mackenzie King, for this contingent of Canadians?
Well, I wouldn't say pressure, but they made a request for them. They asked for some battalions from Canada.
And how well did we treat the survivors of Hong Kong? How many, of the 2,000, how many were killed?
500.
Would they be killed or die in prison camps?
Both prison camps and killed in the action. There are about 557 altogether. The rest spent 4.5 years in very barbaric prisoner of war camps.
Tell me about that and how the survivors are getting on, because I've seen a dozen stories over the years about claims for special compensation, and you can tell me whether or not these particularly hard done to prisoners of war were ever fairly treated by their mother country after the break. A woman just phoned me up just now and said I appeared to be shocked by what you were telling me about what happened to prisoners in the hands of the Japanese. A number of people in my class at school died in prisoner of war camps on the Burma Road. How bad were the prisoner of war camps as told in your book?
Well, there were so many incidents of brutality in the camps. When I first start thinking about it, the first thing that comes to mind is that they were given a handful of rice and a cup of water in most camps and expected to do hard labor. And some people's weight went down to 80 pounds, 90 pounds.
Wasn't the Japanese rationale in that many of them were living on the same food?
Yes, that's right, but they didn't have to do hard labor. They didn't have to work in the coal mines or unload ships or do that sort of thing.
I'm going to take some phone calls for the next few minutes. There are a couple here already who want to say their piece. Tell me about the Kamloops Kid.
Kamloops Kid, well, that's a very interesting case, if I can call it an interesting case. But here's a fellow from Kamloops who was a Japanese-Canadian. His father had been a hero in the First World War.
On which side?
On the Canadian side, yeah. His father was on the Canadian side and won a medal, as a matter of fact, for bravery. But he went over to Japan and joined the Japanese army. He hated Canadians. He had been treated, he thought, was racial prejudice in Canada. There's one incident in Kamloops where he went to a birthday party and a woman said, "We don't want a Japanese picture in our snapshots." And he recalled this incident many times to people in the camps. Anyway, what happened is he wound up as a translator in one of the prison camps in Hong Kong. And he treated the Canadians there absolutely atrociously. He was the most sadistic person they'd ever met there. He was getting his revenge. He's ordered beatings. He had people beaten. All sorts of terrible things happened because of him. And after the war, he was hung as a war criminal.
He was hanged?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. What else? What else? What else? What else? How many years did you research this?
I spent a year researching the
pensions. What on pensions?
Yes. Well, what happens to the pensions today, still 40 years later, a lot of the veterans are still fighting to get 100% disability pensions from the ailments that they derive from the camps. They can't prove that these ailments are from the camps, and that's the ongoing fight they have with Ottawa. Out of the 900 survivors, roughly 177 of them have 100% disability. The others don't.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, just to continue, and never mind what they did to the nurses. They treated the Chinese far worse, burned them alive.
Were you there at the time?
Well, I was very small at the time. I was about 4 years old. I'm Chinese White Russian.
What happened to your family?
My family lived on the hill. My father brought us to Canada, and...
But you survived the war under the Japanese?
Well, we got out.
Oh, very few. Not many got out, did they?
I can remember the day that they came and the burnings, the screamings, it was atrocious. And I was only about 4 years old.
Well, ma'am, the book is called The Desperate Siege, The Battle of Hong Kong. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes.
I'd like to confirm what the author is saying.
How can you do that?
My brother-in-law was there.
And he was with the Canadian troops when he was there?
No, he was with the American Marines.
The American Marines weren't there.
There were no American Marines there.
And
Oh, no, he could have been in America.
Oh, he could have been after the war, yeah, that's possible.
Were there no American Marines in Hong Kong at the time?
Not during the battle, not during the fighting, no.
he was a Japanese prisoner, is what I'm saying.
Oh, I see.
Yes. In which camp?
Pardon me?
In Changi. Where was Changi?
I don't know, it must have been in Malaya perhaps, but it wasn't in,
Maybe.
involved
Anyway,
in this.
thanks, ma'am. I thought we might get a Hong Kong veteran here.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Ferguson. I was wondering, the suffering of these Chinese, of the people who suffer, the Canadians who died at Hong Kong, wasn't a large part of it due to the military commanders, not only the British, but also all over Asia? A lot of people really underestimated the Japanese fighting capacity.
You're absolutely correct, sir. In fact, at Hong Kong, what happened, they got these ridiculous intelligence reports from the British. One report that comes to mind is that they said the Japanese have notoriously bad eyesight, and therefore they would be very, very bad pilots, and they didn't have to worry about them. Well, they came over and destroyed the airport within 5 minutes.
Not only did they take Hong Kong, but also Malaysia, and also the Dutch East Indies and the Philippines. They all fell in sort of a landslide.
I don't know how the British could have been that stupid, although I'm prepared to believe it, because the Japanese had been fighting the war in Manchuria and through the mainland China from about 1933 on.
Exactly, and they were just 60 miles north of Hong Kong. They're butchering people all over the place there, but they really thought there was a sense of racial superiority about it all. They thought the Japanese were too inferior, and they wouldn't dare ever do anything to Britain.
How stupid could they have been? Well, I know how stupid they were. Go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack.
I often say that if Winston Churchill had known the truth in 1940-41, he'd have surrendered.
Jack, and good morning, Ted Ferguson.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. I was one of those mentioned in your book, in fact, the first, John Fonseca, in the first chapter.
John Fonseca.
Oh, that's right, yes.
John, nice of you to call. Have you read the book?
Yes, yes, thank you very much. I congratulate Ted for making a very nice effort on the thing, and he's covered it well. But there's one point that I would like to mention. Where the hell did he get the fact that my wife was Chinese, or that my mother was Chinese?
You didn't tell me that? Because I have it in my notes.
Well, you certainly got it all wrong. Maybe there was some Chinese there way back in 7 generations ago, but my wife is certainly not Chinese.
Quite funny, right in the first chapter of the book. Here we are, John Fonseca. That's right. His father, a Portuguese merchant, had made a fortune introducing grape nut flakes, is that right?
That's right.
And Gillette razor blades to the China in the 20s.
That is right.
And while working as a waiter at a posh hotel, you, John, this is your life, 17, won a $7,000 sweepstake.
Not 7,000, 2,500, but that's here, neither here nor there.
Yeah, how did you survive that war, John?
Well, I think I preserved my sense of humor, and the fellas that were hanging on all together to help each other. That was the most important thing.
How long were you in the prison camps?
Until I was in C.U.P.E until 44, and then in Japan until until the end of the war.
Until the end of the war. And John Fonseca, Ted, was one of the people whom you interviewed.
I'm sorry I made an error about that.
No.
I guess there'll be minor errors all through it, I guess, because those things sort of happens when you do this kind of book, especially in events where 3 different people see them from 3 different ways. That is one of the problems when you're doing things that happened 40 years ago. You do make minor errors.
Trouble because there are 2,000 stories from 2,000 different people who were over there in prison camps.
Yes, and they all see it a different perspective.
How old are you now, John? 58, 59?
I'll be 70 in May.
70 in May. John, thank you very much for calling.
Thank you very much. It's interesting. I watch you every morning.
You couldn't do anything better.
Thank you, Jack.
Thanks, my thanks to Ted Ferguson. The Desperate Siege, the Battle of Hong Kong. I'll be back after the break. I suspect the big political story as yesterday and over the weekend will be the Liberals' plans, apparently, to make the constitutional debate in front of the Senate House Committee virtually secret. It becomes quite obvious they don't want it televised. And of course, they're insisting on the December 9 report day. And this morning, a story out of Ottawa says that Liberal members of a parliamentary committee decided today they can vote on changes, if any, to constitutional proposals, even if no opposition members are present. That seems kind of stupid, I must say. Surely this is one issue that should be on television in committee for those who want to watch it. Constitutional changes. The actual debates are going to be held, it would seem at the moment, without television and without the necessity for the opposition to be there for a vote. That might put a slightly different perspective on some of the letters I'm going to like to see this morning. And the first letter is from Vancouver, and it refers to Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and a listener by the name of Mr. Hunter, who has some quite strong and positive views about it. The letter says, "Dear Webster, thank God we have a man at the helm. Mr. Trudeau is determined to bring home the Constitution so that Canada will at long last be a country intact. If this great man, and if I defy anyone to say he isn't, were an English Canadian and not a Frenchman, he would probably be accepted as our saviour and not the SOB that we are so fond of labelling him. For God's sake, man, use your own judgment and don't fall in with the majority rabble out here with no thought for the country, but only filled with greed and hate. Please, Mr. Webster, stop infuriating man and let right be done." Well, there's a man who'll take the constitutional package any way it comes, providing it's Mr. Trudeau's way. On the other side of the coin, I have a letter coming up here, no name on it, unfortunately. I'd much rather have letters with names on them, and it's from Nanaimo. We know what the name is, but we've taken the name off. And it says, "Dear Webster, Mr. Trudeau says there is no danger of Western separatism. Now, I don't speak for anyone except myself, a 45-year-old ex-serviceman, high school educated only, who is provincially voting NDP unless things change, but generally votes PC federally. If Mr. Trudeau or his successor continue his march towards a centralized republic with no constitutional monarchy, then I, for one, will fight, first through my MP, then the courts, then through demonstration, but in the end, if necessary, through any violent means, but if all else fails, fight." Well, I really should have had a name on that. Here's a snide little letter about dear old Webster, and this too comes from Vancouver. And it says, 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 this is a recording. "Dear Webster, your propensity to see no evil and hear no evil is well known, being constantly visible. Now, with the budget before you, can you believe that Trudeau, Lalonde, etc. have carefully planned the demise of Western Canada as an economic force of any consequence in Canadian affairs? You better believe that is exactly what is happening. And money being money, Ontario is silently cheering from the sidelines." Anonymous from Vancouver. I don't like these letters as anonymous. Maybe change our policy on this. And if we can't use the name, well, I'm not sure. This letter, too, is complaining about, or it talks about the network broadcast we originated from the West about with Trudeau, Lalonde, Joe Clark, etc. And the letter says, "Since we were ready to complain about your past handling of Mr. Trudeau, it is only fair to say that your interview was eminently satisfactory. It showed you have not lost your ability to bring out the essentials and matters which have been the concern of every healthy Canadian, especially Westerners. We are sure that such interviews give some consolation to Canadians and have a restraining effect on political ambitions associated with the destiny of Canada and citizens' rights." Vancouver. And finally, this letter. This is about energy. It's quite good. It's from Vancouver Island, and it says, "Dear Webster, it was refreshing to see Bob McClellan, BC Energy Minister, on your program, and to note the excellent manner in which he delivered his convictions as to the undoubted and typical Trudeau Energy's rip-off, Energy Revenue's rip-off, which of course is designed and landscaped by the liberal backroom landscapers to clip the claws of the upstart Western premiers, as they view them and us, who constitute the only roadblock in the Trudeau and company plans for a centralized government in Canada, with the provinces and their governments being mere vassals to do bidding. G. Marwick, Vancouver Island. Well. I'm quite worried about what they're going to do with this Constitutional Committee. We'll know by Monday morning, though, how it's going to be handled and if it's going to be, quote, secret, unquote. I'll be back after the break. There have been some very key changes made in the content of this program. Gladys, is that not a fact, Gladys? Why are you sitting there so frosty-faced and wooden-faced? Because it's a freeze frame. Gladys, how are you this morning?
Oh, I feel so much better with no hair.
Turn your head slightly. The other way. Very nice indeed. Monday morning, a busy day. Back 9 a.m. precisely. New hairdos, do's and all. Yeah, I'd leave my body all the time.
You know, looking up alien beings on this planet, I know that.
I'm going to move into the Social Credit Caucus room in Victoria this morning, listen to every word and report it tonight. Can be done, you know. It can be done.
Yeah.
Out-of-body traveling is perfectly proper.
I do it all the time. That's what's frightening about it.
I know, me too.
You guys are way out. What is this routine? Would you be surprised that this afternoon I'm proposing that within 10 days we have something you can look at?
Okay, if you have, I'll eat it. If you rub this the wrong way, it covers you with garbage. Just appalling. And now the wee man's got his finger going again. Oh, dear mother.